Without further ado, I'd like to take a moment and introduce Kirsty Manliklik, who's here with us from the EPA's WaterSense program. Recently, he worked on the EPA's label program for low-embodied carbon construction materials. Prior to that, he was a program manager for the EPA's Green Shell Partnership Program, and he holds a PhD in environmental engineering from University of California, Irvine.
Mhm. All right. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you for that kind introduction, Chris. As always, we appreciate you and your team helping us make this webinar series happen live and also making it available for folks that can't join us. Today, I am grateful to introduce my colleague, Jonah Schein, to talk about using a tool from our Energy Star colleagues here called Portfolio Manager that can actually help you understand water use in addition to energy. I'll go ahead and throw the link to that tool in the chat in a little bit. Jonah is the National Program Manager for Homes and Buildings here in the WaterSense program. He's got a little bit of a fun intro. So Jonah is a self-professed water nerd who has spent his career focused on water efficiency, first via desert agriculture, and for the last 2 decades through high-performance buildings. He has overseen the technical development and implementation of the WaterSense labeled homes program really right from the beginning since its inception. He has also led numerous efforts to better understand and influence water use in the field. In addition to the WaterSense labeled homes program, these have included the EPA water score for multifamily properties, as well as several standards, research reports, and papers focused on modeling, quantifying, and understanding water use. Jonah is a resident right here in the district with his wife and their dog, Jilly, who can usually be heard in the background on phone and conference calls. She's not here with us today, though. And in his free time, he enjoys biking, running, swimming, hiking, camping, climbing, traveling, and just about any activity that lets him get outside. Let's keep it moving. All right. So I do mention this at every webinar, but our webinars are part of a monthly series that we co-host with Energy Star to encourage water efficiency within the commercial and institutional facilities space. So already this year, we've held 6 webinars where we covered how small operations and small maintenance changes can really save you water. Second was how you can kind of go beyond the low-hanging fruit and do some retrofits or replacements, really do those capital improvement projects. The third one was if you're starting from ground zero, and how you can do your very first water assessment. Our fourth one was focused on the outdoor space and outdoor water use and how you can start to tackle landscape transformations. Our fifth webinar was focused on updating restrooms and how changes there can help you save water. And most recently, we looked at what you can do to minimize water use in buildings, particularly process and equipment cooling. As always, recordings of these webinars are available on the Energy Star website as well as our website with WaterSense if you're interested. And after today, we still have one more webinar to close out this year on a high note. We plan to dig into how to use advanced metering technology, otherwise known as AMI, to improve water management and detect leaks. You can go to our website now to register or just be on the lookout for when that invitation comes out so you can sign up. It should be interesting, and I think you won't want to miss it live. Lastly, I know undoubtedly there are really great, innovative water saving stories out there. I said this at a past few webinars. If you'd like to go from being in the audience to being a speaker with us, please reach out. We really love to hear it. We're actively recruiting and planning for our webinars next year in 2025. And in your engagement in WaterSense really brings value to everyone. I think we've got maybe anywhere from 15 to 20 speaking spots. So again, don't be shy. Right. So just some run of the show. After I go through some really quick WaterSense basics, I'll turn it over again to Jonah, who will get into today's topics covering different ways to track and compare water use. He'll touch upon EPA's water score. We'll point out a lot of technical references that are available for all of you and for the public. He'll jump into Data Explorer, and I think we should actually have plenty of time to be really interactive with the Q&A. Okay, so just in case we have some new folks tuning in fact, I always hope that we have some new folks tuning in because that really is the goal to keep expanding that reach. WaterSense is a voluntary program that was launched by US EPA in 2006. The program works to promote water efficiency so that we can help organizations and the consumer really save water for future generations. It's really not hyperbole. When you save water, that can help us, utilities, really defer capital improvement projects for later. When you're saving water, that also saves energy and greenhouse gas emissions, as well as more money. Really at multiple steps in water distribution. So your work, all of our collective work and efforts really do matter. The WaterSense label that you see here gives really just a simple way for consumers and businesses to identify water efficient products, programs, practices, and homes. And products that earn the WaterSense label have been independently certified for water efficiency, but also, and this is really key for us, performance as well. We really don't want folks to feel like they're sacrificing performance for water efficiency. You can have both. The label is reserved for products that reduce water use by at least 20%. And again, they have to perform just as well as what's currently out there with those standard models. There are a wide variety of residential and commercial products eligible for the WaterSense label that can be used in commercial and institutional facilities. Again, to date, we've had over 45,000 product models that have earned the WaterSense label in the 8 different categories you see here, spanning indoor plumbing like toilets, urinals, shower heads, faucets, as well as irrigation products like irrigation controllers and spray sprinkler bodies. And again, yeah, I invite you to go check out our website if you want to learn anything more specific about these products. And again, we also work closely with our co-hosts, our Energy Star colleagues here in the building, to have them include water factors in their specifications. And conversely, in kind, we consider energy savings in hours. So for example, Energy Star certified clothes washers, dishwashers, ice machines, and combination ovens are all also water efficient compared to standard models. And with that, Jonah, it's a pleasure to be able to pass it off to you.
Well, thanks so much, Kersey. It's great to be here. As Kersey mentioned, WaterSense and Energy Star really are sister programs. We're partners. We work together across a variety of different parts of both programs. But specifically, Portfolio Manager, I think, is one place where we really have a strong history of partnering together and working to make Portfolio Manager, which I think for a lot of you is probably the go-to place for tracking energy use and benchmarking your building's energy consumption against others, and then expanding it and also making it the go-to place to track water and water use as well. So, like I said, it's been part of a long-term partnership between the programs that we're happy to continue and have really had some great success doing. So, as Kersey mentioned, we're here today to talk about water use and some of the tools and different methodologies you might have to compare your building against others. And to me, the fundamental question here really is, how much water should my property be using? And it's a deceptively complicated question. Efficiency is actually a pretty complicated thing, right? A lot of different things influence your potential resource consumption. For those of you that maybe come to it from more of an energy use background, another thing that's interesting to note is that water use is more variable than energy use. It's about 10 times more variable across the typical ranges that we see. There's a variety of reasons for that. A lot of it really comes back to this fact that if we look at size and climate, right, because we spend so much of our energy expenditures on space conditioning in our buildings, those two factors alone do a pretty good job of normalizing energy use across different building types. They don't do the same for water use. So, just to illustrate this point, in this slide here, I've taken a data set that we've worked with, and I've just broken it up into the ranges of water use and counted the number of buildings that we have in each bucket. And this is pretty typical of what you might see. It might take a little bit of a different shape. A lot of times what you wind up is sort of big bars on the side, sort of long tails for typical consumption, and then maybe a bump in the middle as opposed to this one kind of goes down. But you always see this really big spread, right? So any given type of property, I think this data set was multifamily properties. The property might use 100,000 gallons a year. It might use 2 million. The tricky thing is that just because a property uses a small amount of water doesn't mean that it's efficient. And just because it uses a large amount of water doesn't mean that it's inefficient. So this is sort of the crux of the challenge that we're dealing with and that we're trying to provide you a little bit of guidance on. If you're a property manager or you're someone who has a portfolio of properties and you want to know, maybe you're getting those water bills and you're feeling like they're pretty high, how do you help target your resources and how do you understand what might help, where the opportunities for efficiency might lie? So the other thing I want to be careful of here is we probably have participants on the call today that are at all sorts of different stages in their journey. Some of you might have a pretty good handle on how efficient your properties are in regard to water use. Some of you might just be starting out. I never want to discourage people from taking that first step, but to me, there is a little bit of a hierarchy that exists here. Right. So again, I never want to discourage people if you're just at the very beginning, even just doing something as comparing water use between two facilities, especially if they're the same type of facility, hopefully in the same climate, relatively the same size, same primary operating purpose. Again, definitely better than nothing and is not a bad place to start. It's even better if you can do some sort of normalization by a simple universal metric. And we will talk a little bit about that in this webinar as well. So this would be something like water use intensity, which in Portfolio Manager we define as gallons per square foot per year. Oftentimes a better option than that can be normalizing by a property type specific metric. So for example, if we were dealing with hospitals, we might look at gallons per hospital bed as a better measure of the sort of operating intensity of an individual unit. And then what we really sort of consider the best is to normalize across multiple characteristics. That's what we do with the EPA water score. Works very similar to the Energy Star scores in Portfolio Manager that you might be familiar with. The other thing I do like to take a second to recognize here is I never want to indicate that, all this analysis is ever going to replace the need to actually get on site and do an audit. If we lived in a world where resources were not limited, where we had plenty of staff time, plenty of budget, and we could send someone out to each and every facility that we want to look at and make sure that we really have a good understanding of why it's using water the way that it is, that would be the preferred. Most of us don't live in that world. Some of you might have the staff or the budget or have a small enough portfolio that yes, you can afford to do, you have the resources to do that, and that's great. Like I said, I think the vast majority of us probably don't live in a space in that world, and so what we want to do is look at the tools and the analysis and all of the resources we have that help give us the best possible idea of what we need to look for and where our best opportunity for success. I'm defining success here as saving a lot of water, and where our best opportunities are going to lie. So I'm actually going to start at sort of the bottom of that list, and we're not going to talk a ton about the EPA water score today, mostly because unlike Energy Star scores, which exists for I think 19 different property types in Portfolio Manager, we unfortunately only have the EPA water score for one building type, which is multifamily properties. But like I said, I want to highlight that it is a tool, and I also want to explain why this is really what we consider the gold standard of being able to understand whether or not properties are using water efficiently. It's definitely someplace where we are trying to go in the future, and we'd like to see the EPA water score for additional property types. We're unfortunately very data limited, but this is what we're trying to achieve. So for those of you that are familiar, the EPA water score works just like an Energy Star score. It's 1 to 100, just like in school. 100 is good, 1 is bad. On Energy Star scores, of course, if you get a 75 or higher, typically you're eligible for certification. We don't have that certification element available for the water score right now. Might be something that we look at in the future, but certainly a valuable feedback metric that you can use. So you get a 50, that means you're about average. If you get 75, it means you're in the top 25%. 25 means you're in the bottom 25%. Okay. Easy to understand, just like in schools. And again, it's taking all of that really complicated information about efficiency, operating intensity, size, climate, density, all of that really complicated information, and boiling it down to that one easy to understand score. So if we look at how this works in practice, I'll just take my 2 example buildings here, and you look side by side, they look really similar to each other, right? They use exactly the same amount of water. They're both using 56 gallons per square foot, which is pretty typical, well within the expected range of a multifamily property. They're the same size, both at 150,000 square feet. They have the same climate, the same irrigated area. There's lots and lots of things about these properties that make them very, very comparable. But at the end of the day, they do actually have different scores. And what the score can cue into here is the fact that the property A, actually we have every reason to believe that there's more operating intensity. There's likely to be more people present in this building compared to property B. What that tells us is that when we look at what the expected use intensity is of both of them, even though they're using the same amount of water, property A is actually using less relative to its peers than property B. So again, whereas if you were just looking at this in a sort of simple comparison, they might look like they're on equal footing. What we wind up seeing when we look at it through the lens of the score is actually we probably have more of an opportunity for water savings in property B because it's using more water relative to its peers. To dig into this a little bit more and sort of look at what this might look like across a range of properties, if you had sort of a whole portfolio based on your service territory, your management portfolio, whatever the case may be. In this instance, I've put sort of a whole data set of properties into this graph. We have water use on the Y, number of units on the X. So one of the ways that we would very frequently normalize water use in multifamily properties is as water use per unit. And that's essentially what we're doing in this graph. And as you can see, there's a pretty strong relationship, right? The more units you have in a property, the more likely you are to use more water. Now, if I were to draw a line here and I were to say, okay, I'm going to look at the ones that are above that line, meaning that they're using more water per unit than we might expect. Yeah, that might do an okay job at helping me identify the high water users. I'd probably get some wrong. I'd probably get some right, but I'd make a lot of mistakes because there's other aspects, other operating characteristics of a multifamily property that aren't represented in either water use or the number of units that don't come out in this analysis. Another thing that we often see people look at in properties is the year built, and of course, the year a property is built is not a direct influence on its water use, but we're essentially assuming it's a proxy for the type of equipment that we might have that might be present in the building. So in this case, we're essentially making the hypothesis that, all right, an older building is more likely to have, say, to have non-WaterSense labeled plumbing fixtures. Non-WaterSense labeled plumbing fixtures use a lot more water, and so that might be an opportunity. And again, you see that there is a little bit of a relationship here. Would we do a good job identifying the places that might have more opportunities here? Again, we'd probably catch a few. We'd probably miss a whole lot because there's a lot more that influences a property's water use than just the age of its plumbing fixtures. Now, if I start to use the water score, and in this case, not only have I plotted the water score on the Y and the year built on the X, but we've also separated the different properties into size of their water use, and we've split those into quartiles just to make it easier to see. So the bigger the bubble, the more the water use. Now we're looking across. Now our lens is taking us across multiple factors. We're considering water use. We're considering size, the number of units of the square footage of the building. We're considering density. We're considering irrigated area, and we're also looking at the age of the building. So if you look at these big bubbles, on the bottom of the y-axis and the left of the x-axis that I've circled, that are properties that are using a lot of water, they're performing poorly relative to their peers and their older properties. Now I've got a pretty good sense of where I need to look, because I know that there's now because I'm looking across these multiple different layers, there's a pretty good chance that these are places that are right for product retrofits. So what we've seen a lot of our partners do with great success is take these properties and say, these are the ones we're going to make sure we target for our product rebate programs. We think they have old plumbing products. We're going to make sure we get WaterSense labeled products in. As Kirsty said, nice thing about those is not only do they save a lot of water, they also perform as well or better than conventional products. And we're going to raise the water score by reducing water use, save a lot of water, and improve the performance of the buildings. I can do that same thing, but in this case, I've taken, again, the water score broken out into the quartiles. So we're targeting these big yellow bubbles here, the properties that use a lot of water, but we're not just looking at the ones that use a lot of water. We're looking at the ones that use a lot of water, score poorly, so they're low on the y-axis, and we've put irrigated area on the x-axis. So similarly, these are properties that are performing poorly relative to their peers, are using a lot of water, and they have large irrigated areas. What does that tell us? It tells us that these are pretty good targets for outdoor efficiencies. Things like irrigation audits, systems upgrades, improvements to controllers, all of the things that can help us really improve outdoor water use. And again, we can know this without ever stepping foot on site. We have a pretty good idea of where to look. So, like I said, that's really why we think that normalizing across multiple factors with something like the EPA water score or the Energy Star score in the case of energy is the way to go. But as I said, unfortunately, we only have the water score available for one property type. So now I want to change focus a little bit here and talk about what are some of the tools that we can use if we don't have a score. So hopefully people are a little bit familiar with Portfolio Manager. Kirsty, I think you went ahead and already shared the link in the chat in case you're not. But here's just a screenshot of Portfolio Manager. If you are familiar, you've probably noticed and hopefully spent some time on this water tab. So it's default in Portfolio Manager. Everyone will have it. And meters for water work pretty similar to how meters for energy work. You can create them for each property. Often they are available through web services, either from your utility or from your service provider. Definitely worth asking if that's the case. They're not quite as, web services are not quite as freely available for water as they are for energy, but we are making progress and we are getting better. Once you have all of your meters loaded and have the data entered tracking water use, it'll do things like these nice little graphs for you. It will also track your water use intensity and your baseline water use intensity over time. Now, one thing that Portfolio Manager does for energy that it does not do for water is that on energy, if you either don't have the score because you don't have all of the information entered, or it's a property type that simply doesn't have an Energy Star score, it will still give you this weather normalized energy use intensity. So it'll still calculate your BTUs per square foot. It will still normalize them for climate, and it will even give you this comparison of how far above and below the median uses. Typically, that median use comes from the Commercial Building Energy Consumption Survey. That's not something that exists for water, right? So you'll see this kind of running theme that part of the reason that we're lagging a little bit behind energy, relative that water's lagging a little bit behind where energy is in a lot of these tools is, unfortunately, we just don't have the same data products. We don't have the same sources. People haven't been looking at it as seriously for as long. So they do this in energy. So Portfolio Manager will do this in energy, and again, it's sort of in that middle of the road, definitely better than nothing comparison. It's not something that we have for water, and you can change this. This is customizable in Portfolio Manager. You can go ahead and do it by water use, but you'll notice that for water use, we don't do any sort of weather normalization, nor do we do any sort of median comparison. So, Energy Star and WaterSense, we sort of got together and we said, well, that would be really useful if we were able to provide that type of comparison. Because, as I said before, if you're looking at a property or you're looking at a portfolio of properties and you want to know whether or not you're using too much water, what framework what comparison do you have? So since we don't have anything like the like CBEX, like the Commercial Building Energy Consumption Survey for water and national census of water use, we decided to look at the data that we're actually collecting in Portfolio Manager. So we pulled out all of the water use data. There's about 284, at least as of 2019, when we conducted this analysis, there were about 284,000 properties that were benchmarking water and/or energy within Portfolio Manager. Of those 284,000, 137,000 of them were benchmarking water. We took those 137,000 properties. We then put them through an algorithm and through filtering to essentially try to determine whether or not we thought that water use was real and accurate. So we could look at things like, first of all, eliminating duplicate properties. We could look at things like whether or not they were in sort of an expected range. We could look at where the data came from. We could sort of filter them in all sorts of different ways to try to answer this question. Hey, do we believe that this is valid information or not? And then we took each individual property, and that filtering and cleaning took us down to about just south of 44,000 properties. So 44,000 unique properties that had water use that we believed was accurate for 2019. So 44,000 properties, well, obviously a far cry from 284,000. So we've lost a lot of properties in that process. At the same time, as someone who's worked in sort of collecting water use data for a long time, I would challenge you to go out and find a data set of 44,000 properties of water use data anyplace else. Really is kind of unique and exciting that we can offer that. So now we've got those 44,000 properties, and we broke them down into individual property types, and we looked to make sure that they had adequate distribution across climate. Obviously, climate has a big impact on water use, especially when we look at outdoor water use. Size, sometimes water use according to size and properties is linear. Sometimes it's not, right? So if I've got a 50,000 square foot property and you have a 100,000 square foot property, does that mean you use twice as much water as I do? Maybe. It depends on the property type and how they're being managed. We also looked at vintage, so the age of the property. As we discussed before, age is not necessarily a direct influence on it, maybe even less so than it is in energy, because we do have both sort of architectural changes in use in terms of the amount of glass and everything that's used, as well as insulation practices. But it's a pretty good proxy for the type of equipment that might be included in it. So we want to make sure that we have a good distribution. And then finally, operator, right? So, if we've got, 2,000 um, 2,000 properties in food service, but they're 99% the same, the same fast food chain, does that really tell me something about how fast food restaurants or how food service uses water? Or does that tell me something about how that particular restaurant operates? So we want to make sure that we have some diversity in that regard as well. And this is the result. So again, we've tried to give as much information as we can wherever possible, in addition to the 5th, 25th, 50th, 75th, and 95th percentile. We've also given medians for property type specific metrics. So, for example, hospitals, which I mentioned before, we might use something like gallons per hospital bed per year as a better normalizing factor. Hotels, gallons per guest room per year is another popular example. So just trying to give as much information as we can. Now, if you are going to use this as a point of comparison, again, is it perfect? No, absolutely not. But if you're concerned about properties whose water bill is very, very high, and you look at this and realize that it's far exceeds the median gallons per square foot per year for that property type, yeah, it's a pretty good indicator that you might want to take a closer look at that property. I also like to use the same data here, right? So this is the same information as what I just shared via that table, but I like to look at it in this way, in this graphic as well, because I think you really do start to see some patterns emerge. Some property types really do just exhibit that really, really wide range. I'll pick on hospitals again. Again, this range for the 5th to the 95th percentile, which I think from a data perspective is probably what we want to consider typical, right? We want to consider anything between those bookends as being sort of expected values. It's pretty big, right? And if you know anything about how hospitals work, we can start to ask some questions that might be influencing this, right? So, yeah, knowing that it's a hospital is helpful. Knowing, as I said before, like gallons per hospital bed per year might be even more helpful. But about, does it have a dialysis center? Does it have a surgical center? These are very specific operating influences that have a very real impact on how a hospital would use water, that unfortunately a simple water use intensity, gallons per square foot per year, isn't able to capture. So again, you see why we want to move things towards that water score, right? Towards having the more advanced analytics that can cross multiple normalizing factors. But certainly this probably is better than nothing. Again, there's some other really large ones. Fire stations is another one. We think a big influence in that is whether or not there's any training facilities at a fire station. So if you've ever been to a firefighter training facility, well, you can imagine it actually involves quite a large use of water. There's other fire stations here, which I don't know. I think some of them are just really into washing their trucks. Again, we see this big range, and that's very much to be expected. So, good point of comparison. Hopefully, it's useful to people on some level. Something else that is coming sort of down the pike, so to speak, is that Energy Star does have this tool called the Portfolio Manager Data Explorer. And I've included just a few screenshots here. It is mostly the same data as what I just shared, but it's in a dynamic tool. So what you're able to do with the Data Explorer, which does not yet include water, but will in the near future, is yes, you can look at site or source EUI, and again in the near future, water use intensity as well. But you also have the ability to break that down by property type. You can further break it down by subtypes and by size, and even by geographic region. So if you look, again, if you want to know, you have a property that you're looking at and you feel like the water bills are high and you feel like it's an opportunity to use water more efficiently, you are able to drill down to a much more granular level in terms of property type using the Data Explorer. And so, again, this is something that we plan to update in January of next year. It will include water use data from 2019 through 2023. So the water use intensity table I shared with you before is just calendar year 2019. When we started working on it, we wanted to make sure that we were not being influenced by any pandemic era variations in water use, because as you know, time goes fast. Most of us have probably forgotten about it, but if you are in the property management or energy management or water management fields in 2020, 2021, there were a lot of questions about how the pandemic was influencing patterns. So that's why we chose 2019 for the table. This will be 2019 through 2023. As I mentioned before, this is something you can filter by state. CBSA, which is a little bit smaller than MSA, a little bit more specific. Property type, subtype, climate zone, year built, will really let you sort of drill down and get a better sense of how your building compares in terms of water use intensity. For comparison, we again we're still working on this, but we believe that the final data set's going to include water use from over 100,000 properties. So you recall before the water use intensity table, the technical reference was based on just under 44,000 properties. We think we're going to be able to grow that, almost more than double it to over 100,000 properties, which is exciting. We do have to redact it in places. In certain places to protect properties' identities. So, I think it's if there's I believe it's 5 properties in a certain category, then we just go ahead and redact that information because we feel it'll be a little bit too easy to identify a specific properties, and we do want to protect people's privacy. And it will have some basic processing to ensure realistic values and eliminate duplicates, but it's not going to have a formal evaluation. We're not going to technically QC that data. So it is going to be driven by what people put into Portfolio Manager. Again, we'll do our best to make sure that it is actually representing real data and real values, but we're not going to spend too much time making sure that people have entered accurate values, because it is, at the end of the day, sort of a crowdsourced data product. And then I do want to spend a few minutes. I think we're doing pretty good on time, right, Kersey?
Yep.
Yeah, good. Again, we highlight these resources in other webinars, but if I've piqued your interest at all and you feel like you know where to go and compare your properties, I do want to highlight some of the resources that we have within WaterSense, because once you identify that a property is performing poorly, I think the natural question is, well, what do I do about it? Right? And thankfully, WaterSense does have some tools and resources. We have a whole suite of best management practices, which we're slowly but surely updating with more recent information. We have, in addition to these webinars, which are a great resource, we have fact sheets by facility types. We have water saving tips. We have some assessment tools. We have worksheets and checklists that will help you identify potential savings opportunities and calculate potential ROIs. All of the trainings and webinars that we do here are recorded and available, and we also do our best to collect and organize case studies and make those available as well. Here's a quick look at our best management practices, WaterSense at work. Again, we really do encourage you to check this out online. We certainly understand that at these webinars, a lot of the people we wind up talking to here tend to come to it from an energy management perspective, or maybe just have more familiarity with energy management than they do with water management. So we're doing our best to give you a good starting place here. And we think that WaterSense at Work, the best management practices, really do a nice job of giving you that intro and making sure you know where to start in the first place you want to go. I also want to give a call out for a new resource that we have, which is a guide on AMI for facility management, automated meter infrastructure. Again, this came out. What was this? A month ago, 2 months ago, Percy? You remember? Something like that. And then in the recent past. But I also want to highlight this because this is going to be the topic of our next webinar in November. I don't know whether or not AMI or AMR is available in your specific service territory, but I definitely encourage you to check and see if it is, and if so, to sign up for any leaks for any notifications or tools that might be available. The reason that I think this is really beneficial is what AMR does is it allows much more timely meter reading and analytics. So in this blue bar, I've kind of just laid out sort of what the temporal resolution, what time resolution means in terms of getting feedback and information on your water use. So on the left over here, hopefully, our hope is that everyone's getting at least monthly or bi-monthly bills. Some of you might only be getting water bills quarterly. And again, that's kind of more of a traditional billing system where someone has to actually come out and physically read your meter. Still the norm, by the way. Seems kind of old-fashioned, but still very much the norm for water meters in this country. And yeah, that can do some nice things. Again, it's all you need to track water use intensity in Portfolio Manager. It can help you identify some seasonal patterns. Would it help you identify, say, a leak? Eventually, right? But again, if you're only getting a bill once a quarter, or really once a month, let alone once a quarter, you're not getting very timely response. And also bear in mind that there is a billing lag, right? So even if you're getting monthly bills, you might not get that bill to 20 days after the month ends, and that's the first time you find out that you have a really huge bill that's letting you know you have a leak to address. Well, by the time all is said and done, you may have had the leak for a good 2 months before you can act on it. With AMI or AMR, we're looking probably more in the range of somewhere between an hour to every 15 minutes. And what that means is that if you start to develop a leak, you should be able to, and you've signed up for leak notifications, which many utilities do support, you're going to find out about it in a much more timely fashion and be able to address it. We can also do, as we get sort of into the hourly to every 15 minutes, doing a better job as we move towards 15 minutes, we can really start to identify some of the indoor versus outdoor water use patterns. And again, if you sign up for the notifications, your utility might be able to provide you some feedback on how to help. So worth a try. Again, it's becoming more common. Whether or not your utility provides that service, I can't tell you, but it's certainly worth asking. And then also worth noting, sort of on the far right-hand side, as we move to more, as we approach water use data on every minute, or even getting in the more extreme cases to every second, this is more the domain of more on-site water monitoring devices, but they're going to let us do sort of near real-time leak notification. So we'll know almost immediately when a leak develops on site. That type of data also lets us do some types of end-use disaggregation, right? And again, so doing a much better job at every second than we can at every minute, we can start to identify, hey, there's a toilet leak on the second floor, or there's a cooling tower valve that's stuck open, things like that. Which again, not something you're going to get from your utility, but I want to put it out there because we are seeing more and more of these types of devices come onto the market. So again, just putting that plug out there because I think it's a very natural continuation of what we're talking about today, and it just so happens to be what we're talking about next month, right, Kersey?
Yeah, thanks, Jonah. So again, just to reiterate, November 20th, next month, that will be our last webinar for this year. It's going to be featuring East Bay Municipal Utility District out of Northern California. They were our presenter on the restrooms webinar that we recently did. And I've already gotten a little bit of a sneak peek of what they're going to present. They've got a lot of interesting stories, lessons learned, case studies around the topic of AMI. So again, really welcome folks joining and being a part of that. Sometimes during these webinars, I do take a look. I can kind of see some familiar names of people who tune in every time, but I also see some new names. And so definitely invite you. I know people usually pick and choose whatever topic is pertinent to them, but I would encourage folks to, join a webinar for a topic that you may not necessarily be kind of in your wheelhouse. It's always, great to get new folks and really have people bringing in different perspectives. So, and really on that topic of AMI, if you've gone to a recent water conference, it appears in like every single session. And so it seems to be a pretty forefront topic for the industry. So we're definitely going to, again, we're talking about it in November 20th, and we're probably going to bring it back as a topic for next